welcome to this session of Ideas at Ford. I'm Darren Walker. I serve as president of the Ford Foundation, and I am an African-American man wearing clear lucite glasses, a navy blazer, a blue checked shirt, and I'm sitting in the library at home. And I'm delighted to welcome you and welcome my friend, Hubert Joly, who has written a terrific book. He's the author of a book called The Heart of Business. And this book has been written by a man who is iconic in the pantheon of great CEOs. Best Buy, of course, which is a company we all have bought from and continue to buy from, is a company that he led, did a remarkable turnaround. He's also a board member of important Fortune 100 companies like Johnson & Johnson and the Ralph Lauren Corporation. And he teaches at the Harvard Business School. So I want to welcome my friend Hubert for this conversation about his book. Welcome, Hubert.
Darren, thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted. So everyone, I am originally from France. I'm a 61-year-old white man. I have a navy blue Ralph Lauren sweater and a light blue Ralph Lauren, I'm an infomercial right now, shirt. I'm in my office in Midtown Manhattan. So you're seeing books behind me, including maybe The Heart of Business. And then a picture of my beautiful, adorable wife, Hortense Legentil, who is one of the most extraordinary executive leadership coaches in the world.
Well, she has a great student in you, of course. But also, Hubert, I have to say, getting to know you these last few years has been one of the highlights of my work. And so I'm delighted that we would have this chance to hear from you about how you think about the future of the corporation. And you have some radical ideas that I think are not as easily embraced as you might seem to make it appear, because you are so brilliant and charming and convincing. But do most CEOs agree with you about this idea of the tyranny of the shareholder value? I mean, this idea that CEOs and companies are tyrannized by this idea of the share price.
Yeah, and Darren, I so look forward to our conversation. It's a treat. And yes, we're friends and now neighbors now that I've moved to New York City. We have to rewind. On September 13, 1970, a certain Milton Friedman came up with this idea of shareholder primacy and essentially telling the world that the only responsibility of companies was to maximize shareholder value. And I think this is a dangerous idea. And Darren, can we agree that the world we are in is facing a multifaceted crisis, health crisis, economic crisis, societal crisis, racial crisis, environmental crisis, geopolitical tension? That's the all-you-can-eat menu of challenges. And I think that this idea, this obsession about profits, together with, so I have two people on my most wanted FBI list, Milton Friedman for shareholder primacy and Bob McNamara, the inventor of scientific top-down management. I think this is what has led us here. And what's the definition of madness, right? Doing the same thing and hoping for a different.
But Hubert, you have to stop. Hubert, wait a minute. You're saying that Milton Friedman, you want to put a nail in the coffin of Milton Friedman, the iconic, the deity of American capitalism of the last 50 years. I mean, this man wrote the most influential essay in the history of capitalism next to Adam Smith, some people would say.
And I think, Darren, yes, I do want to do this. And I think if we collectively had followed Peter Drucker as opposed to Milton Friedman in the last 50 years, we would have been better. Why do I say that an excessive focus on profit is wrong? Don't get me wrong. I believe shareholders are a very important stakeholder. Making money is an imperative in business. And at Best Buy, we did okay, right? Our share price went from a low of $11 to now $120. It's an imperative. It's also an outcome. And I don't think it should be the goal. Now, first reason is, if you, for all of us who have studied, generally accepted accounting principle, GAAP profit is not even trying to represent economic reality. There's many limitations to GAAP. The other thing that's more fundamental is that, let's imagine that your doctor would be purely focused on your temperature, right? You wouldn't like to see that doctor. You'd like a doctor that looks at your health and your wellness and encouraging you to deal with the driver of your health. So for me, and this is something I learned 30 years ago from a client when I was at McKinsey. He told me in business, and we all know this, in business, there's three imperatives. There's the people imperative, having good people, well-equipped, well-trained. You have a business imperative, which is you need to have customers who like your products, and you do have a financial imperative. But excellence on the financial imperative is the result of excellence on the people imperative, which leads to excellence on business imperative, and then finally, the financial imperative. So when you lead, you have to focus first on people, then business, then finance. He gave me a very concrete example, Darren, that I've always followed. He said, in a monthly business review, when you look at the performance of your business, do not start with the financial results, end with the financial results. Your CFO will make sure there is enough time, but start with people and organization, then customers, right? And then financial results. And
but Hubert, most CEOs are not judged this way. So you are describing the world that Hubert Joly wishes to see, but most CEOs are judged by analysts and guidance that is GAAP. It is determined by GAAP, in fact. And so you're right, GAAP doesn't measure all the things that need to be measured, but GAAP defines how CEOs get measured. So how do we get from the world that we have now to Hubert Joly's world?
So several things. Again, shareholders are very important. They are in charge of our savings and our retirement. And they're actually people. And by the way, shareholders today, like, BlackRock with Larry Fink and State Street and Vanguard, they all recognize that a long-term strategy is important, that the environment is important, that embracing all stakeholders is important. So people who oppose stakeholder capitalism and shareholder capitalism, I think, are wrong. I think that if we step back, and that was so apparent last year, Darren, Best Buy is headquartered in Minneapolis. When the city is on fire following the horrible murder of George Floyd, cannot open your stores. You cannot run a business if the community is on fire. If the planet is on fire, cannot run a business. So what we need today is a declaration of interdependence. The old days where, and that applies to the, talking about CEOs. I think CEOs see that today. If you were to do a survey, I'm a member of the Business Council, that's the top 200 CEOs in the country. And you and I on the Ralph Lauren board, Patrice Louvet believes that as well. Now, the formula I lay out in the book is the idea that at the heart of business, you have to pursue a noble purpose, make a positive difference in the world, put people at the center, and create an environment that can unleash human magic, as I say.
Yes.
Embrace all stakeholders in a declaration of interdependence, and treat profit as an outcome. And I think the experience of there's multiple studies that show that actually, if you're really interested in maximizing shareholder value, which is, again, a very important dimension, that's the way to do it, right? And today, employees demand that, right? They want to work for companies that are ethical, that are responsible. Customers demand this, right? And then society demand this, and shareholders demand this. I will always remember, Darren, when Larry Fink, started sending these letters to public company CEOs. I got my first one, I think it was in 2017, and he was encouraging us to articulate, be clear about our long-term strategy and our purpose. And what I did is that I hand-delivered to him our shareholder letter, which was a direct response to his letter. I went to his office, we had a wonderful chat, and I thanked him for providing air cover, because you're right.
Yes.
There's a myth that the way to maximize shareholder value is by being brutal and only focus on the short term. Now, of course, you need to be focused on the short term, and you need to be focused on the long term. You need to focus on all of your stakeholders. In my view, Darren, is that most CEOs and most leaders understand this. Where we are today is no longer about convincing people that this is the shift we need to make, but we're all travelers on that journey to learn how to lead from a place of purpose and with humanity, learn what it really means to embrace all stakeholders, while at the same time continuing to perform well from an economic standpoint.
Well, you're saying that we're learners, but Hubert, I think a lot of people, and let's talk about this question of leadership, which you write beautifully about in the book. The kind of leader who is going to want to be comfortable on the journey is probably a different kind of a CEO than, so you have hired and fired CEOs. What's different today about the profile of the modern 21st century CEO that was different than in the past?
Yeah, everything has changed. If I try to emphasize, first, the mission of the CEO has changed. It used to be only about maximizing shareholder value. Now it's being a force for good in the world. The scope has changed. To paraphrase Godfather, tell Michael I actually liked him. Nothing personal. It was only business. Now business is about, of course, employees, but customers, community, planet, and shareholders. And so the scope has changed. And then the leadership profile or leadership model has changed drastically. If we rewind to last century, and you and I probably know some of these people, it was the leader as the superhero, smartest person in the room, is there to save the day, too often driven by power, fame, glory, or money. It doesn't work. Nobody wants to follow somebody like this. And frankly, somebody like me, I've had to change. I studied as a hard-charging, deeply analytical McKinsey consultant, and now I'm somebody who believes in human magic. So I'm the living proof that people can get better and change. And the leadership model today, I think, Darren, that I believe in is the purposeful leader. Somebody who is clear about their purpose. How do they want to be remembered? Not so much because of their banking account, right? But because of the difference they've made in the world. They need to be vulnerable. The most frequently phrase I now use is, my name is Hubert. I need help. I don't know.
But that's not, when you talk about the purposeful leader in your book, so much of it is unfamiliar to people who have been led by these hard-charging CEOs, top-down, McNamara style inspired leader. This idea of being the hero, the pedestal, all of these things are normative, and you are actually articulating a different vision. And I think it's a really powerful idea.
Yeah, and because I need back to this multifaceted crisis, right? We have let's agree, we have a few ticking time bombs. And so we need this urgent refoundation of business and capitalism around these principles of leading with purpose and humanity. And I think what's exciting in a way, now that we recognize, right, it's the first step of the 12 steps, right? We have a crisis on our hands. We cannot continue. So let's agree with that. Let's recognize this. And I think in the last 12 to 18 months, I think you'll agree with me, Darren, that we've seen so many great examples of great leadership. My successor at Best Buy, Corey Barry, a wonderful woman, she put the safety of the employees, and many did, right, of the employees and of the customers first. And if she was going to, adjust headcount, she was going to delay furloughing anyone for as long as humanly possible until the federal programs kicked in, and until she could really explain to the employees what it means to be furloughed and have the opportunity then to come back. And then she said, I want to make sure that in 12 months from now, the place is in a better shape than now. So let's not do anything stupid. And so same at, you mentioned I'm on the board of Johnson & Johnson. That's a company that decided to invest in the vaccine, on a non-for-profit basis, really mobilize all of their resources in support of that. So people are realizing that change is needed. And now it's not just the CEO, right? It's all of us, because all of us are leaders. At minimum, we're leaders of our lives, right? And so, one of the things I would say is that last year when we couldn't go outside because of lockdown, you had to go inside and decide, pause, slow down, decide what kind of a leader do I want to be? How do I want to, when the pandemic is over, how do I want people to remember me? One exercise we do, Darren, with the new CEOs there's a new CEO workshop at Harvard Business School. We ask them to write down their retirement speech. And how do they want to be remembered? My wife, Hortense, this amazing coach, encourages our client to think about their eulogy. What do you want people to say on that day? That anchors you, right? And then, because of all of the challenges we're facing, as a leader, make sure you take care of yourself, right? And, remember when we were flying on airplanes a long time ago, Darren? Remember that? If the oxygen mask would come down, we were told, put the mask on yourself first before we can help others. So if we're going to be great leaders, that means we need to learn to breathe, exercise, remember to exercise, maybe meditate, journal, have a personal board of director, so that we can lead from the inside out.
And Hubert, I agree with this. I also think that there are some CEOs, some industries who sit and look at you and me and say, oh, these guys, live in fantasy land. Well, of course, if J&J is the kind of company with the margins it has, the products that it has, the profitability that it is built into its operating model. Well, if you're in the fast food industry or you're in the industries that we worry about at the Ford Foundation, which are the industries of the most vulnerable workers, the workers who are working for $9 and $10 an hour, those industries, which is a significant part of the workforce. Their argument is we don't have the capital structure to all of this stuff that you and Hubert are talking about, because people can't afford to pay $7 for a hamburger. So we need to pay people $8.50 an hour because there's no price elasticity. Margins aren't wide enough. We can't get volume up fast enough. So you guys are wonderful in your little fantasy land, but we're living in the real world.
Yes, and you and I are living in the real world. Part of the reason why I wanted to write this book is because of the, delightfully surprising turnaround and resurgence of Best Buy, right? That's a company in retail, right, that everybody thought we were going to die. And, we've been able to effectuate this turnaround, and, there's a resurgence of Best Buy. And so this would have been, in fact, when I started back in 2012, Darren, when everybody thought we were going to die, people were telling me, Barrett, you're going to have to cut, close stores, reduce headcount. So the usual recipe for a turnaround. The way we did it is exactly the opposite. It was a human-centric turnaround where you first start by listening to the frontliners, because that's where the knowledge of what's working and not working is. And I learned so much. I spent my first week on the job working in a store to listen to these wonderful frontliners in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Also, instead of starting with headcount reduction, see how you can grow the revenue. And then as relates to cost, I have this turnaround manual. I'll show it to you next time we're together. On the cost side, first, focus on reducing what I call non-salary expenses, which are all of the element of the cost structure that has nothing to do with people. So let me give you an example. At Best Buy, do we sell a lot of TVs? Yes, we do. They're large, they're thin, so they break. We used to break about $200 million worth of TVs every year. $200 million. If you can reduce that by 50%, that's a $100 million saving, which is good for the customers because we've surveyed the customers, Darren. 0% of customers want to buy a broken TV. right? And it's good for the P&L. And out of the $2 billion of costs we've taken out in the last 8 or 9 years at Best Buy, and listen how I'm still saying we, right? Like
I know what that feels like.
70% was had nothing to do with people. And even if you, as a last resort, you have to reduce headcount, then you see how you can redeploy people because you have turnover. And so people are not the problem. People are the solution. That's the philosophy I'm laying out, which I know works because I've seen it work at Best Buy at many other companies. People are the source. So it completely flips the management philosophy. And by the way, one of the things I'm proud of is not only saving, the 100,000 jobs plus that we've had at Best Buy, but also with increasing starting wage from $10 to now $15. Now, it's still hard to live on the basis of $15, but that's something you do gradually. Investing in benefits for the employees and in their development. A lot of these, before retail, I was in the hospitality sector. These are wonderful industries because these are places where people can get into the workforce, learn skills, and then grow. Like Doug McMillan, the CEO of Walmart, started as a, and so we really have to change the paradigm. And there's too many myths about you need to be, harsh to succeed in business. There's many ways, I'm sure, to succeed in business. But I wanted to lay out and highlight is a human-centric, purposeful way to be successful, which I think is better for the soul, frankly.
And I couldn't agree more. I want to take us back to last year. You mentioned the murder of George Floyd, the other murders that occurred in 2020. And then, of course, came this moment of racial reckoning in corporate America, and many CEOs stepping out and making statements about Black Lives Matter, some authentic, others I think were Academy Award-winning quality performances. But you have really had to think hard about this question of CEOs getting involved in social issues and taking positions when so many shareholders, in fact, and political leaders sometimes, as we've seen recently, say, stay out of this. This has nothing to do with making the widgets we make and doing what we need to do.
Yeah.
How do you discern in giving advice to CEOs about when to say something and when not?
Yes. So it's not, and by the way, it's not just about saying, it's also importantly about doing. So in the case of diversity and inclusion, let's be really clear. This is at the core, not only a moral and societal issue, it's a business issue. How stupid would it be for a business to only recruit from a quarter of the population in this country, people who look like me? That'd be stupid. One of the things I know from experience is
it wouldn't be stupid. It would be history. I mean, I think
exactly. No, exactly.
I think the argument that that some would put forth is that's what we did and it worked. I mean, I think there are some who would argue, you know what? What's wrong with that? Well, it seems to work.
Yes, it doesn't work. So, and if it worked, you can make it better. So one of the things I've learned, and I've been on this journey for a number of years, and Best Buy is not perfect, but I think we've done a few things, and Corey is continuing. As a business, you need your workforce and your leadership team to represent the customers in the community, right? Otherwise, you're going to miss. All right. And so it's a very simple thing. The second thing is one of the ingredients of unleashing human magic is to make sure that every employee feels that they belong, that they're seen, that they're respected, and that they can give the best they have, and they can be the biggest, most beautiful version of themselves. That's a business imperative to do this. And so what is very clear, Darren, is that on racial issues in particular, let's be very specific. The experience of Black men and women in corporate America has been, what adjective would you like me to use? Not acceptable. And I saw that in 2016. We had seen that our employee engagement scores at Best Buy were going up, but I could see differences across gender and race. So what I did is focus groups with our employees. And I used as an excuse the fact that I grew up in France, so I had a lot to learn. But I took what I was hearing from Black colleagues as a punch in the stomach, from the standpoint that I was really shocked. And so that gave me the gut level courage, not just the brain level courage, but the gut level courage to start on a journey to move things. I got a wonderful reverse mentor, Laura Gladney, who's a young African-American woman, to educate me. One of the leadership traits that you need today is be able to say, my name is Hubert and I don't know. So I went to see Melody Hobson, and who coached me. She also told me, Hubert, you can't.
Good coach. You have amazing women who coach you, Hubert.
She said, Hubert, you cannot be who you cannot see. So don't forget to change the top. So when I stepped down from Best Buy, we had a majority of women on our board and 3 African-American directors. And so this is something, so I'm actually optimistic. So this is not a political issue. This is something that as a business, rooting, and of course, there's a societal issue as well. I think our generation, if we stay with it, has the opportunity to, if not end, at least shrink systemic racism to a point where it's so marginal, it doesn't matter. I was born in France, close to the German borders, where the French and the German arch enemies for 2 centuries. Did they kill collectively 50 million people in the last century? And today, are they the closest allies? So I think that's the mindset I think we need to have. Now, that one is a business issue. Well, to your question about societal issues, one of the things we have to remember as a CEO, as a business leader, we're not elected official, right? So we don't have a mandate to change society. And we're not going to get involved in everything. So we have to use filters on when and how to get involved. To me, criteria number 1 is the issue relevant to my business, to my employees, to my customers, to my values, right? So if I'm Walmart, guns is a real issue because I'm selling guns. If I'm Microsoft, H-1B visas, that's a real issue. For me, racism, that's an issue for everybody because of what I said before. Then you have to make sure that you're authentic. And if you're going to say something, you have to follow through and be congruent. So, Nike, which is a great company, when they did their Colin Kaepernick commercial, it backfired a little bit because people said, well, show me what you're doing internally, right, with your D&I policies. And at the time, like many companies, they were not as great as they could have been. Then you have to look at efficacy. So on the issue of the voting rights, on which you've been very vocal, for me, there's no doubt that whether you're a citizen or a CEO, of course, you have to speak in favor of democracy. The question that I go beyond this, and I became a citizen, Darren, 18 months ago, so I'm very excited about this, okay? The question is, how do we restore our democracy in this country? And that's one I'm more perplexed. So, this is one where talking is one thing, but my dream would be for Congress in Washington to establish some norms that would be, minimum norms that all of the states would have to comply with, and that a party couldn't change. So I think there should be I'm dreaming, okay? I'm a dreamer.
Well, it's not a dream, actually. There was that. I mean, it was called the Voting Rights Act, and it set out a federal standard that the states could not, without federal permission, change.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that law, a major part of that law, was deemed no longer necessary by our Supreme Court.
Yep.
And so there is an effort now, but Hubert, I think you speak in a moment of political fraught hysteria in some corners. And so most CEOs do not want to deal with issues of race and they want to deal with issues of diversity, but frontal issues of racism, many would just simply rather not have to engage because it is so toxic and it's so real. And I think that's part of the challenge that we have in this country, in the corporate sector. Now, there are questions for you, Hubert,
Okay.
and which you're not surprised to get this at HBS all the time, I bet. Lots of questions for the famous CEO, the famous Hubert Joly. And so my brilliant colleague, Sierra, is the purveyor of the Q&A. And I am going to encourage the viewers to please submit your questions. And while we do that, I am going to ask you, Hubert, as you look back, what are you most proud of as you've written this great book? And I think each chapter has such a snappy title. You had a good editor here, because you know that in order to sell a business books are often boring and dry and just not interesting, Hubert. I mean, I have to say, but you figured out how to make a sexy, easy to read, compelling business book. What are you most proud of about this book?
So I got a lot of help. Here's the scoop. Writing a book is actually not difficult. To your point, writing a good book is extremely difficult. So in the category of my name is Hubert, I need help, I had this wonderful partner, Caroline Lambert, and this is not a case of a ghostwriter where I told her, these are 3 ideas, go write it. We worked on it together and she made it significantly better. What I'm proud of in this book, it's easy to read. And it's almost like, because how do people learn, right? It's through stories. Theories are interesting, but stories is what helps us learn as human beings. And I think in this book, without making it too long, we were able to capture this philosophy. Yeah. We were able to capture this philosophy of, putting a noble purpose as the North Star, people at the center, embracing all stakeholders, treating profit as an outcome. And then importantly, I believe that I'm a bit more optimistic, I feel, than you are, but it's okay.
I love this, that you, the French man, new American citizen, and you're saying, I am more optimistic. I love that statement.
Yes, exactly. Because coming from a Frenchman, yes, there's an entire backdrop around this. But it's so people are eager to move in that direction, right? Because we all know instinctively in our heart that if we can do this, this is better. And so the book is a very practical guide to how to move in that direction, how to rethink work. What is work for us? Why do we work? How to rethink the corporation, how to motivate people in a way that truly unleashes human magic, and how to evolve our leadership. There's questions at the end of each chapter, which are self-reflective, questions. So my hope is that, it's really helpful to people. And if I've helped, a few million people, I don't know how many books will sell,
Well, it's certainly on the bestseller list, and everyone is talking. All of the business tables I've been at, Hubert Joly's book is being discussed.
Ooh,
so you're making progress.
Yeah, and so if it can help all of us as leaders, and it helped me writing it because I had to more, you know how it is when you actually have to write it down. It forces you to crystallize and articulate and then provide not only the proof of why this makes sense, but the how. So I'm proud. The last thing I would say is that my daughter, right, Agathe, wrote a wonderful review on Amazon where she said that, yeah, the turnaround piece is interesting, but it's how my dad changed over time to become a more human-centric leader, showing that it's a better way to lead. That touched my heart.
Oh, to hear that from your daughter, what a beautiful, validating thing. But I think it's in part because you are so authentic. And that's one of the things you write about, one of the things you talk about. Sierra, questions for Hubert?
Absolutely. So I just want to say a lot of people have shared that they really love your distinction between transactional and transformational leadership. There's quite a few comments in the Q&A about that. So the first question, how do we get corporate leaders to move past Friedman's one-dimensional guidance? What are concrete steps we can take to have them change their thinking on maximizing profit and shareholder value and switching to maximizing value for customers, employees, and society at large?
And of course, shareholders, right? Let's not forget, shareholders are a very important group of stakeholders. They take care of our savings, our 401k, and so forth. So I'm not opposing stakeholders, but having said that, 4 very practical thoughts. 1, be very explicit if you're a leader. And again, I don't care whether it's a small team or you have Doug McMillan's job at Walmart with, I don't know, 1.5 million people. Be clear that you believe that it's people that leads to business success, that leads to financial success. That's the first thought. Be articulate about your point of view. Second, as I was saying earlier, change the way you lead your meetings, because people will hear your words, but they'll watch your behaviors, right? So how you conduct meetings, when I would visit a store, do I first ask to see the financial results, or I connect with the general manager and I ask her, tell me about you and your team, right? And then tell me how is it going? So the questions we ask make a big difference. The third idea is think about, so maybe, Darren, one of the most important decisions we make in an organization, it's the same in nonprofit and for profit, is who we put in positions of power, right? I used to place a lot of emphasis on experience and expertise. I wanted the best e-commerce person or the best supply chain person. Now, increasingly, I look at who is this person? What kind of a leader is this? I had once an interview question when I was being interviewed for the CEO job at Carlson Companies by Marilyn Carlson Nelson, the daughter of the founder. She asked me, Hubert, tell me about your soul. So ask people what drives you, what's important to you, right? So that's another one. And that's, in fact, that's, one of the things we've waited way too long for in my career is be curious about the individual purpose in life of people around us, and then see how we can connect that purpose with their work and then with the purpose of the company. There's many examples in the book that talks about how you do this. So I think it's doable. And again, that's why I'm excited. I was excited to write this book, is that I know it can be done.
And it's hard, Hubert. It's very hard.
Yes.
I mean, the McNamara was onto something when he said, just shut up and do what I say.
Yes.
And why do I have to deal with all of the emotional issues of my people? Why do I have to connect them emotionally? And why do I have to, it's a lot of work, Hubert, to run a big company successfully.
Yes, it sounds really soft, and you're absolutely right. It's hard to do, in part because that's not how we've been wired through our business education and the dominant norm. And so that's why I'm excited about spreading the word that there's a better, more human way to do it, which also happens to work better because, I think at companies in general, Gallup says that only 20% of people are engaged, right? Imagine, maybe at Ford Foundation is 120% of people are engaged. But if you could go on in the world from 20% engaged to 80% engaged, imagine the unleashing of human magic, the ingenuity, what we could come up with to solve all of our problems. So I think it's worth it. Again, there's many different ways to skin a cat. I apologize for all of the cat owners for saying this, but you know what I'm saying? There's different ways to solve problems. I think this formula that it's in the heart of business, I think it's one that really works well and for the benefit of all stakeholders. But to your point, it's hard, which is why I wanted to provide the manual, the how-to manual on how to get this done,
Sierra.
Thank you. So you're suggesting that the profile of the CEO needs to change radically. What does a great candidate look like? from which parts of the economy or which industries are they likely to be recruited, and how can boards be incentivized to seek executives with non-traditional qualifications?
And I think
What
that
do new executive incentive programs need to look like?
Yeah, so let's unpack this. These questions, by the way, apply not just to CEOs, right? I think it applies to all leaders. And again, I repeat, everyone is at least a leader of their life. And so the leadership expectations that I think are important, and I talk about the 5 B's of being a purposeful leader. Be clear about your own purpose. How do you want to be remembered? Be clear about the purpose of people around you and how it all connects with the purpose of the company. Be clear about your role as a leader. Right? Is it to be the smartest person in the room, or is it to create an environment where others can be successful? Be clear about who you serve. I told the officers there at Best Buy, if you are here to serve yourself or your boss or me as the CEO of the company, I told them it's okay. I don't have a problem with that, except you cannot work here. We're going to promote you to customer, which is a very, we'll take good care of you. But on the other hand, if you're here to serve, the frontliners, the organization, then we're good. Then it's about being a values-driven leader, integrity. And then it's about being an authentic leader, somebody who's vulnerable. Is okay to say, I don't know. For me personally, that was the biggest journey, right? From the know-it-all to the learn-it-all. I'm quoting Satya Nadella, a great leader CEO of Microsoft. There's a chapter in the book about the quest for perfection is evil. This is such a fundamental idea. And I think that today, in the boards I'm involved in where we've had CEO searches, or when we look at, appointing senior leaders, these dimensions, I think today they're included because people know that this is what's expected. And so that's where I believe that we've moved forward. And I think that it's all about how do I become a better leader in that direction? That's where all of us, self-included, need help. On executive compensation, I think that's an area where we need to make more progress, because when the rating, the proxy advisors like ISS and Glass Lewis advise investors on for the say on pay votes, they really only look at the correlation between the pay of the CEO and the financial performance of the CEO. And I think if we truly believe in a broader responsibilities of CEOs, then we should put in place, more factors like boards do. Boards don't only look at, when we evaluate a CEO, we don't only look at the financial. So I think around say on pay, it could be an interesting debate to see how do we evolve say on pay assessment, and how do we evolve long-term incentives for senior executives at companies so that they better reflect this new formula. I think we have work to do in this area, frankly.
Sierra.
Thank you. I'll make this my last question. There's a couple of questions about the nonprofit field. One specifically says, I'm a CFO at a not-for-profit and I need help. Some of us in this sector assume we are one of the good guys or gals and don't challenge our organization's norms because we assume we have it all figured out. How do we challenge our colleagues and ourselves to keep improving and learning?
Thank you for that question. And Darren and I love the non-for-profit sector. In fact, we love a certain Kewin Feldman, who is the director at the National Gallery. I don't know whether Kewin is
best
on the
museum director in America.
And I'm piling on the best CEO in America. Wonderful. Kewin used to be the museum director in Minneapolis, where I was on the board. I've been on the board of trustees for a long time. And Kewin and I had been talking about this. Leadership in the non-for-profit world is actually, if you embrace the philosophy I described, very similar to the for-profit world, because a museum, and Kewin and I had wonderful conversations when she was in Minneapolis. You start with what's the mission of the organization, right? And of course, arts can be such an enabler of wonder and learning and human connections. And then you get into what's going to drive a better outcome. So how do you mobilize all of the employees in support of that mission? And of course, there is an economic reality, whether it's for profit or not for profit. We all need to balance, right? Things. And so how do you drive efficiencies? Because one of the things we did at Best Buy is we would drive efficiencies every year so that we could reinvest in the growth and in the future, and then give some of it to the shareholders. If we had told the shareholders, no, we're going to reduce the margins, and in 5 years we're going to increase the margins, they would have said, you guys can do better than this, right? So I think a lot of the same principles apply. And of course, in the nonprofit world, that the financial outcome is not the goal, but that's also what I'm arguing for in the for-profit world. So a lot of similarities. And one of the things that I really emphasize at Best Buy, sometimes at companies, every so often they do a big restructure and it creates drama, and it's so bad. I think it's like in our lives, right? Let's try to be, healthy every year, right? Let's lose some weight. Let's exercise. Let's see how we can get better, how can innovate on an ongoing basis. And if you can turn it like this, then it becomes a very joyous, activity of making things better, which I think is a very human thing to do.
Well, I have the last question for you, because you now find yourself teaching at this elite business school there on the Charles River that has generated legions of CEOs who worship Milton Friedman, who have been purveyors of many of the ideas that you are in your book, you are saying are antithetical to future success. So what is Harvard Business School doing today that is different? Is Harvard Business School generating graduates as they did 20 or 30 years ago who really saw that old-fashioned Friedman, Jack Welch era as the golden era and the way in which we succeed in business? Are you encouraged that you're turning out at HBS a new breed of potential leaders for corporate America?
And Darren, the mission of Harvard Business School, like many other business schools, is to educate leaders who can make a positive difference in the world. And the reason why I got interested in business education, studying with my alma mater in France, HEC Paris, where I endowed a chair on purposeful leadership. And the reason why I joined the faculty at HBS, because I think historically business education has been too focused on teaching techniques. So in the know, do, be, too much on a lot of emphasis on the know and maybe the do, not enough on the be. And my view is that the best leaders I've seen were not necessarily the best leaders because they were the best at spelling out the 4 Ps of marketing or calculating a net present value, but because they had this je ne sais quoi, as the French would say, that's called leadership. Now, to be specific, at Harvard, there's a lot of good stuff taking place. A good friend, Bill George, who's my neighbor in Minneapolis, established this authentic leader development program many years ago. I think the way we structured the new CEO program is along the same line. So there's a lot of good stuff. I have amazing colleagues like Rebecca Anderson, who wrote this book, Reimagining Capitalism in a World of Fire, and she's in charge of one of the key required courses in the first year of the MBA program, Leadership and Corporate Accountability. Dean Nitin Noya, when he was the dean, he's one of the foremost experts on leadership. He's a great soul. And the new dean, Srikant Datar, has made business and society one of his top 3 priorities. Now, is there work to be done? I think if Srikant was on this call, he would be the first one to say. I think in particular, on one of the topics we were talking about, which is race, they've launched a significant set of activities around this. I've had the opportunity to, at Harvard, I'm just a young Padawan. I'm at the bottom of the ladder, but I've had the opportunity to try to help in this area, because I think it's the mission of the school to contribute. And the way I see it is that we're at the beginning of a new era. And so, Darren, when I studied at Best Buy, on day one, I told all of the executives, everybody today starts with an A. I don't care what happened before. I cannot change it. It's all about what we, all of us, are going to do going forward. And every one of us is going to decide how long they keep the A, self included. Some of them, not only kept the A, but got an A+, others not so much. So my view is that all of us, leaders at all levels, boards, investors, rating agencies, proxy advisors, business education, regulators, we all have to, and I think we are, look at the situation as it is, and then decide, and that's a call for action for all of us, right? What kind of a leader do I want to be in the next 10 or 20 years? What's going to be my contribution to creating a future that does not exist yet, but that certainly needs to be more sustainable than what we have now? And so that's the call for action for everybody. There's a lot of work to do, but I think it's exciting because I have 3 beautiful, amazing, very young granddaughters. I think they're going to hold me accountable if I don't do my part. And so I want to do my part. That's all.
Well, Hubert Joly, you are doing your part and more. Your book, The Heart of Business, is in many ways, a call to action to mobilize and transform corporate America to do better, to do more, to be more sustainable, more diverse, more equitable, and more successful and more profitable in the process. This is your thesis, and this is your cause. And we are so grateful to you, dear Hubert, for being with us today. I'm so thankful for your friendship and so happy that you have decided to make Ideas at Ford one of your stops on the book tour. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. We have, in the coming weeks, we have more Ideas at Ford. Dr. Dambisa Moyo and her book, How Boards Work, on June 14th. The Pulitzer Prize winning Annette Gordon-Reed on Juneteenth, her book that has been written about extensively and reviewed with great acclaim. And finally, Ursula Burns, the first woman CEO, Black woman CEO of a Fortune 500 company, Xerox, with her memoir, Where You Are Is Not Where You Are, is not who you are. So I want to thank you all for being with us and hope to see you on June 14th. Hubert, again, au revoir.
And Darren, thank you. And you're such a friend, and I look forward to continuing to learning from you. You have such a unique place in the world. So my life is so much better because I know you. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you all. Bye now.